The United States, despite being a famously democratic nation, is simultaneously known for its disappointingly low voter turnout. The 2020 presidential election had a voter turnout of roughly 2/3 of the voting population, which was the highest it had been in over a century. Yet what was a record for us was lower or barely matched the typical turnouts of recent elections in countries like the United Kingdom, India, France, or Australia. But there was one election in America that by far has had more votes than any other election in its history. Do you know how many votes it had? Okay, wait a minute, that can't possibly be right. That's more votes than there are people in the United States. How is that even possible? What election was this? What? It's not even a nationwide election. How did a state election from nearly 50 years ago have more votes than the most recent presidential election in India? To be honest, I saw a screenshot of this floating around the internet and I thought it was some fake or joke, but it turns out these numbers are actually true. Upon doing a bit of research, the story behind the highest total vote count in American history is actually pretty interesting, and all because of a clause in the state's constitution and a technicality. So the United States is a federal republic, which means its individual states also have their own form of government and their own statewide elections for those state governments. The states elect a governor and also members for their own legislature. With the exception of Nebraska, every state legislature has an upper and lower chamber, usually called the Senate and House of Representatives, just like with the federal government in Washington, D.C. Which, fun fact, while every non-Nebraskan state calls their upper house the Senate or State Senate, for the lower house you have a few states that call it the State Assembly or House of Delegates instead. In the case of Illinois, however, they just simply had a Senate and House of Representatives. One of the important aspects of a House of Representatives is redistricting. Populations grow and move around, and if you want each district to roughly equal the same number of people, that means you'll have to redraw the borders for those districts. There was a deadline to redraw updated district borders before the 1964 statewide elections, but unfortunately, political differences got in the way. The Republican-led Illinois House presented new maps for approval, but the Democratic Governor Otto Kerner Jr. vetoed the maps, accusing them of being gerrymandered towards favoring Republicans. A special independent committee was established to try and make some maps, but for some reason they couldn't agree upon anything either, so it ended up going to the Illinois Supreme Court. While Republicans argued for reusing the 1955 districts and Democrats argued for new maps, the Illinois Supreme Court ultimately ruled a decision in early 1964 by pointing out a clause in the state constitution for this very situation. If there were no agreed upon maps in time, there would have to be an at-large election. What does that mean? It means that since there are no districts for this election, rather than a person voting for the representative of their district, it means they're voting for every seat across the state at once. So basically, all Illinois House candidates would be on the same ballot, and the top 177 would be chosen. If that sounds chaotic, that's because it is. It had never been done before in the state's history, and now the Illinois government had to figure out how to make this work. You could imagine if this was happening, you'd want to stay up to date on things that are going on, especially from somewhere reliable. One of the ways you could do that is through this video's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is an app and website that not only gathers what's being reported around the world, but also who's covering it and with what bias. After all, some sources cover events more than others, and with Ground News you can get a better overall picture. This article is interestingly not covered across the political spectrum, probably due to the political nature of the story. It also appears to only be covered by American sources, which makes sense, it's an American story, but it's overall good to know how many features Ground News has that help you become aware of the limitations of what you're reading. If you click the link in the description before October 31st, you can get 30% off an unlimited access subscription to Ground News, and enjoy one of the best ways to get the full picture of the news. Thanks to Ground News for sponsoring this video. So it turned out having an at-large election wouldn't be too insane for Illinois at the time. Illinois was a state that had what was called cumulative voting for their local elections, which meant each voter would normally have 3 votes that they could distribute however they wanted across the ballot. They could give all 3 of those votes to one candidate, which was called a bullet vote, or they could split them if they weren't sure who to pick. So in a way, this at-large election would be a similar idea, just, 177 votes instead of 3. Since people may not have had the patience or the background knowledge of so many candidates, the ballot would also have a straight ticket option, meaning if I tick this box, just assume I'm casting one vote for each candidate from this political party. However, this opens up an obvious issue. While it is somewhat true that people in the 1960s were less strictly partisan than they are today, that didn't mean there weren't lots of people who were. Maybe enough people could either be lazy enough or strategic enough to just vote straight ticket, and then 100% of the Illinois House would go to one party. So to prevent a total takeover by one party, limits were established to where each party was allowed to nominate only 118 candidates, guaranteeing that at least 1/3 of the seats would be of the opposing party. On November 4th, 1964, the election took place. Because everyone could cast up to 177 votes, this resulted in a total vote count of 525,723,540 votes. Because of this massive vote count, it naturally took a while for results to tally. Both parties also demanded recounts in several counties of the state. By mid-December, the overall results were tallied, and it's a good thing that the 118 candidate limit was established, because it turns out most people did in fact vote the straight ticket option, resulting in 118 seats for the Democrats and 59 for the Republicans, swinging control of the Illinois House to the Democrats. Illinois was a historically strong Republican state for decades, so this was somewhat of a shocking turn of events until you remember that November 4th, 1964 was also a presidential election year. Notably, the election of Lyndon Johnson over Barry Goldwater. This election was a strong landslide victory for Johnson, and Democrats across the country and in most states had a down ballot effect. Basically, if there's a strong sense of urgency or passion towards the presidential candidate, voters are extra likely to just vote straight ticket down on other choices. So how did Johnson generate the down ballot effect for his election?
6, 8, 9,
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other, or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd.
That might have had something to do with it. Some notable results of the election was that the top voted Democrat was Adlai Stevenson III, son of Adlai Stevenson II, who ran for president twice in 1952 and 1956, and both times lost to Dwight Eisenhower. The top voted Republican candidate? Dwight Eisenhower's younger brother, Earl Eisenhower. Naturally, both parties in Illinois agreed they hated this process and didn't want to go through with it again. So in 1970, Illinois made a new and updated state constitution, which updated the redistricting process to make sure that an at-large election would never happen again. And so far, it's worked. And since then, no other election in America has had so many votes, and I doubt any other ever will. I'm Emperor Tiger Star, and I'll see you guys next time.